Mary, thank you very, very much for inviting me to speak to you here tonight and for your very kind words. Καλησπέρα σε όλους. Καλώς ορίσατε. Χρόνια πολλά για τη Διεθνή Μέρα της Γυναίκας. Θα αρχίσω με ένα quote που είναι quote από έναν φοιτητή μου. I want to open people's eyes, just as mine were opened. These were the words of one of my MBA students at the end of a 12-week course at Swinburne University, and they truly capture my role as an educator and change agent. Tonight, I hope to inspire you to take action, because gender equality starts with all of us. My talk will cover 3 key areas. Firstly, some general stats and remarks about International Women's Day and setting a bit of a context. Secondly, I will talk about what I have done to support women and accelerate change. And thirdly, I will provide some suggestions on what we can all do in our sphere of influence to effect desirable change. Now, setting the scene and a bit of context. On International Women's Day, we are called to accelerate progress and march forward, lifting women into leadership while ensuring we stand together in support. We often hear about breaking the glass ceiling and smashing glass doors, but gender equality is far more complex. Intersectionality reminds us that gender is intertwined with culture, race, ability, and privilege, shaping how women experience power and discrimination. For many, these barriers are compounded and often invisible. The experiences of a white Anglo woman differ greatly from those of a woman of color, a migrant, a refugee, an LGBTQIA, or someone with a disability. Legislation and policies alone will not create change. We need cultural shifts, led by those in positions of power and supported by all of us. This is why we must not only break barriers, but remove them entirely. Now, some key statistics on gender inequality. It's going to take 131 years to close the gender gap globally. Women still earn 77 cents for every dollar earned by men. Women perform 3 times more unpaid work, care work, than men. Women hold only 27% of global leadership positions and own just 20% of the world's land. Gender-based violence costs economies up to 3.7% of GDP. These statistics come from the Equality Institute. In Australia, last year, 101 women were killed due to gender-based violence. This is something that is not just happening in Australia, but is happening everywhere in the world, and no country as yet has found a solution to eradicate this problem. Now, in Australia, the statistics show that while 46% of board director positions are held by women, culturally diverse women hold only 5.7%. To achieve true equity and equality, we must address racism, sexism, and all forms of discrimination at systemic, structural, and individual levels. Policies must be supported by programs advocating for diversity and inclusion. One size will not fit all. organizations must confront unconscious biases and privilege in recruitment, promotions, and decision making. Now I'll get to my second part and to tell you what I have done in various roles that I've had in addressing these inequalities. Throughout my career and my pro bono work via the Food for Thought network, and I'd like to acknowledge here Professor Vassos, who is our patron, and also some of my past and present committee members who are sitting on table 1 for their support. So I have been deeply committed to intersectionality, diversity and inclusion as I have experienced racism, sexism, ageism, bullying and harassment. I came to this country after graduating from high school in Greece with no English. So you can understand, by the time of learning the system, learning English, I've made lots of mistakes and I was prone to all of these things. So, people who have not experienced things like I have, dismiss it and say, I got there on merit. And the discussion around merit is a big one, and we can spend a whole day or a conference debating it, because merit is defined by those in positions of power. Now, some of my initiatives include, I've changed a couple of careers. So my first career is in education, and I came to Australia after Whitlam came into power. So there were a lot of programs aimed around social justice at the time. And in education, I'm very privileged to have been selected to be part of a curriculum project developed by the Education Department of Victoria and South Australia, and for the teaching of Greek in state schools. So I was one of 6 curriculum writers, and that material is still used in schools today. Then I became a consultant promoting languages in school, Greek in the first instance, and then all languages and multicultural education. So I was a big advocate for teaching kids their heritage languages and running bilingual programs, because kids were coming to school with no English. The first generation parents had no English, and all the studies were showing that their development was delayed. So we were delivering the curriculum in Greek and simultaneously for them learning English, and finally around grade 3 it was half and half. So that was my first job in industry. Then I changed careers, became a HR manager. I initiated policies and launched programs addressing domestic violence survivors' needs. We were one of the first organisations, I'm talking about more than 20 years ago, that addressed the needs of women in domestic violence situations. We brought in a policy and trained managers how to pick up the signs to support these women. Simultaneously, we went into partnership with Men's Line to ensure that the men were getting the support. So that was one of the initiatives around diversity and inclusion. The other one was policies around mental health. And the other one was raising awareness about the needs of employed carers. We did a project, a full year project with Carers Victoria, fully funded by the government, where we ran sessions around Victoria. I was working for a large corporate at the time, and also provided funding to some of the employed carers to change, to get their parents Chinese TV or Greek TV or whatever they needed. It was one of the really amazing projects that I was involved with. Now, in hiring, I was recruiting graduates and also managers for the different organizations that I worked with. I started removing the names and the schools. First time I was involved with recruitment, people would say, oh, Johns, he must be the son of so-and-so, who is the CEO of so-and-so. So, second year I thought, how can I make this more equitable? And that's what I did. I think they do that today, which is very good. Also, in recruitment, you know, there are a lot of tools that discriminate against people whose first language is not English. So, always advocating and raising awareness around those issues and making sure that we have a range of tools in selecting and promoting people. In leadership development, I introduced a model called Removing Barriers for Everyone to Succeed in an executive MBA program in collaboration with Mount Eliza Business School. This was ahead of its time. This is 99, 2000. What happened, do you think, to me? Raising awareness back then, removing barriers. The barriers went up for me because everybody was in denial that there were problems in the organisation. So I'm saying that because people who drive change need support, need everyone's support. They put their neck out there and their careers might be, at stake, and they don't want criticism. They want people to rally behind them and help them. At Swinburne University, where I had the pleasure of being a sessional lecturer for about 20 years, I helped future leaders and lecturers understand how unconscious biases and white privilege shape workplace and classroom cultures. In the community, because of all this experience that I've had, and back in 2000, I took my kids to the Gold Coast, and I couldn't move from the balcony. I was between a rock and a hard place at work. I was really being harassed. It was a terrible toxic situation. And I thought, well, if I'm feeling like this, there'll be a lot of other women like me who would be experiencing similar scenarios. Why don't I put my energy into something positive and develop a network that would support women like me? So after a year in research, I founded the Food for Thought network, and I called it Food for Thought on purpose. It's the Greek Australian Women's Network. But back then, when I was meeting women and men, I was going to different conferences, breakfast, lunches, a lot of them would tell me they didn't want to identify being Greek. They'd gone through the assimilationist period and they were denying their heritage. Things have changed today. The third generation is very different. They're celebrating, they want to embrace. It's cool to be Greek today. It wasn't 24 years ago. So, now through this work, through the network, we have organised over 150 events where we connect and inspire and develop women. Men are always welcome. I authored the book, Her Voice, Greek Women and Their Friends, giving voice to 42 women, 30 Greek women and 12 not Greek women. And some of those women are here tonight. Lots of stories in the book. You can see Chris Pavlidis over there, and also Thula Paraskeva. Their story is in the book, and I don't know who else is here. So, led last year the inaugural Global Women and Hellenism Conference in Greece, connecting women of Greek heritage from around the world. We had 43 presenters, 11 session chairs, and 160 delegates from Australia, USA, Canada, Europe, and other parts of the world. And last Saturday, hosted on Zoom the first international event with a global audience of over 100, learning and amplifying our voices at the global level. In 2024, I was honoured with an AEN, an Order of Australia, for my commitment to diversity and inclusion. Now, the third part and last, what we can all do to drive change. change starts with all of us. Here's how we can contribute to gender equality in our everyday lives. For women in the room, please support other women. I hate this tall poppy syndrome. When somebody does something and is successful, other women try to chop them and bring them down. It is toxic. It is terrible. Please stop it. For men in the room, support the women in your lives. Ask them about their experiences and truly listen. How do they experience the world? What is it like in their everyday life? What is it like in their work environment? Listen. As parents, be mindful of the messages you send your children. Teach boys to respect girls as equals and encourage all children to pursue their passions without gender-based limitations. Don't tell them you're a girl, you can't do this. Oh, boys don't cry. Boys do cry, and boys need to have those feminine traits developed and be equal partners. As managers, engage in conversations with your staff about their lived experiences of racism and discrimination. Listen and take meaningful action. As CEOs and senior leaders, conduct cultural audits, applying an intersectionality lens and act on the findings. We have an expert in the room that does that in my team, Penny Sihinis. Thank you for being a mentor and a supporter to me. Thank you. So, undertake unconscious bias training to understand how privilege operates in your organization, and put programs in place that address barriers, but also programs that develop marginalized groups. Again, I need to stress, one size will not fit all. You need different programs for different purposes in different groups. When hiring or promoting, challenge yourself. Are you choosing people who look, think, and act like you? Diversity will not happen without intentional action. You may ask then, are we there yet? The answer is no. We've made, big inroads, but we're not there yet. It will take 5 generations to close the gender gap, and at this rate. Women still fear walking the streets alone and remain underrepresented in leadership positions. This is why we must not only break barriers, but remove them entirely. Let's commit to opening minds, amplifying voices, and creating a future where all women rise together. In closing, I ask you to reflect on the following questions. 1, reflect on the messages you heard growing up. What are those things that you hear in your voice? I think Vasu said about, oh, you haven't got a girl, or, it's a boy or a girl. My mother, just hearing my late mother, who's grew up in a Greek village in Epirus, she would say, she was like, that was the belief of that generation. I'm one of 4 children, 3 sisters and a brother. And she would say, οι 3 τσούπρες από τη μία μεριά και ο Κώστας από την άλλη, ο Κώστας βαΐζει. That is, Κώστας, my male brother, was more worthy of the 3 of us, the 3 girls. So these are some of the messages, and that people grew up with, thinking that males were the superior race. Just reflect on that for a minute. Reflect also on your power and influence, and apply an intersectional lens. Set a vision or a goal for determining your areas of influence, and take care of yourself and others. Together, let's accelerate women and march forward towards true gender equality. Thank you for listening. I now would like to call upon a